The F-47 will be the most advanced, most capable, most lethal aircraft ever built.
It has been designed specifically to outpace, which means it's faster, outmaneuver, and outmatch any adversary with a sixth-generation fighter.
It's early in the morning at a high-tech air defense outpost off the coast of China. Every radar screen is completely green, totally calm. System diagnostics say the sky is empty. But out in the real world, atmospheric sensors suddenly spike. There is a massive pressure wave tearing through the air at twice the speed of sound. Yet, the tracking scopes show absolutely nothing. No radar signature, no heat trail, just a ghost blinding a billion-dollar defense grid. How do you fight an enemy that isn't technically there? Breaking the record that chilled Moscow and Beijing. Let's get into the actual math that caused an absolute meltdown in the defense ministries of Moscow and Beijing. In May 2025, Air Force Chief of Staff General David Alvin dropped an official infographic that completely blew the lid off the F-47's classified performance metrics. The headline, "This machine officially shattered the record for the longest-legged combat reach ever engineered into an American fighter jet, clocking a confirmed combat radius exceeding 1,000 nautical miles on internal fuel alone, all while pushing continuous dash speeds above Mach 2. To put that into perspective, the legendary F-22 Raptor, which has been the undisputed king of the skies for 2 decades, is basically chained to a leash with a combat radius of only about 590 nautical miles. The F-47 literally doubled it. Now, if you're looking at this from a purely academic standpoint, you might just think, cool, it flies further. But to military strategists, this specific ratio of extreme long range mixed with high sustained speed completely rewrites the physics of air warfare. Think about the massive geography of the Indo-Pacific or the vast stretches of northern Russia. When a fighter jet is restricted to a short radius, it creates a massive logistical headache. It means your planes have to launch from highly predictable, forward-deployed airfields that sit right inside the enemy's strike zone. Or they have to rely on a massive, slow-moving caravan of aerial refueling tankers to keep them from running out of gas. By engineering a heavy fighter that can travel over 1,000 miles out, hit supersonic speeds, execute its mission, and fly all the way back without ever needing a single drop of external fuel, the US military just broke the geographic shackles that have limited Western air power since the Cold War. This is exactly why military analysts call the 1,000-mile mark the strategic heart of the entire aircraft. It forces adversaries to completely recalibrate their early warning systems and spatial calculations. Before the F-47 specs went public, foreign air defense planners could draw a neat circle around known US bases and accurately predict exactly where and when American air power could intervene. The Phoenix completely erases those lines. It introduces a level of operational uncertainty that foreign generals frankly didn't think they'd have to deal with until well into the late 2030s. The fact that the US Air Force is already locked in to buy at least 185 of these hyper-advanced platforms means this isn't just a low-volume science experiment. It's a massive, scalable shift in baseline power projection designed to ensure that if a conflict kicks off, the US can strike anywhere, anytime, with absolute impunity. Moving on to the geometry trap to understand why distance matters, the rebirth of dominance. So to really get a bigger picture of how we got to this phantom over the Pacific, we have to look at how college kids study history by looking at the exact moment the old rules broke. For the last 20 years, the US military basically cruised on the absolute supremacy of fifth-generation fighters like the F-22 Raptor and the F-35 Lightning II. If you open any modern defense textbook, those planes are taught as the gold standard. But behind closed doors in Washington, military planners were quietly freaking out. They realized that while the F-22 is an incredible dogfighter, it was designed in the late 80s to fight a war over a cramped European theater. Fast forward to the mid-2020s, and the geopolitical landscape completely flipped. The Pentagon realized that if a conflict ever kicked off in the Indo-Pacific, the massive geographical distances would leave fifth-gen jets completely out of position, requiring a massive network of vulnerable aerial refueling tankers just to stay in the sky. That anxiety is exactly what birthed the Next Generation Air Dominance Program, or NGAD. This wasn't just a minor upgrade or an F-35 plus. It was a complete, ground-up reimagining of aerial warfare designed to counter the massive military modernization happening in Beijing and Moscow. The program was kept under absolute lock and key for years, operating in the deep shadows of highly classified budgets. But the chess pieces started moving fast in March 2025. That was the exact moment the defense sector shook when a massive $20 billion contract was quietly awarded to Boeing to spearhead the engineering of the platform, designated as the F-47 Phoenix. The aviation world instantly knew the paradigm had shifted. The US wasn't just building another lone wolf fighter jet to replace aging airframes. They were engineering a highly integrated family of systems. When you look at the blue line schematics of the F-47, the design philosophy leaps right out at you. It abandons the classic tail fins we've seen on every fighter jet since World War II, opting instead for a smooth, tailless flying wing design that looks more like a sci-fi spaceship than a standard airplane. This structural layout radically reduces its radar signature from every single angle, not just the front. More importantly, it leaves massive internal volume for fuel bladders and advanced weapon bays. Boeing designed this heavy fighter to act as a stealthy airborne quarterback, a central hub that sits deep inside contested airspace, vacuuming up gigabytes of raw data and coordinating an entire theater of war while staying completely invisible to the naked eye and electronic sensors alike. It represents the total rebirth of American technological dominance, engineered specifically for a new era of great power competition where losing is simply not an option. But the real breakthrough wasn't just hidden in the stealth coatings, piercing the bubble. To grasp why this geometry is a nightmare for foreign generals, you have to look at how China and Russia have spent trillions of dollars over the last 2 decades building what military analysts call anti-access/area denial zones. In political science or defense studies, this is basically a high-tech, no-trespassing zone. The strategy relies on layering massive networks of long-range surface-to-air missiles, like Russia's heavily exported S-400 and next-generation S-500 systems, alongside China's deep radar grids and DF-21D carrier-killer anti-ship ballistic missiles. The entire goal of this setup is to create a defensive bubble that extends hundreds of miles past their coastlines, effectively telling the US military, if you bring a carrier or a standard fighter jet anywhere near this perimeter, we will detect you and blow you out of the water before you can even launch a weapon. For a long time, that strategy was highly effective because older Western fighters were built for a totally different era. If you look at the F-16 or the F-35, they were engineered with shorter ranges because they expected to operate out of cozy, well-established air bases in Europe or the Middle East, with plenty of fuel trucks nearby. But the Pacific theater isn't a tight European landmass. It's an absolute open ocean desert. If a conflict broke out over Taiwan or the South China Sea, those shorter-range jets would be forced to operate from a tiny handful of highly vulnerable runways in places like Guam or Japan. Adversaries knew this, which is why their entire doctrine is built around targeting those specific island runways and keeping American aircraft carriers pushed back past the horizon. They figured if they could deny the US a place to park and refuel, they'd win the war before it even started. This is exactly where the F-47 slams the door on that entire playbook, because it packs a massive 1,000-plus nautical mile radius and doesn't rely on slow, unstealthy refueling tankers that glow like Christmas trees on enemy radar. The Phoenix can pierce right through those multi-layered defensive bubbles completely undetected. It turns the adversary's massive multi-billion-dollar missile investments into completely useless metal tubes. The F-47 can take off from distributed, highly secure airfields far outside the enemy enemy's strike zone, slip through the outer perimeter of an A2/AD network, and dismantle their command and control hubs from distances where foreign planners expected to operate with absolute total immunity. By the time the defensive sensors realize something is wrong, the F-47 has already struck its targets and is cruising home at Mach 2. It completely deflates the strategic leverage these nations thought they held over the Pacific. Yet a pilot is only as good as the engine keeping them in the sky, the heart of the Phoenix. Now let's look at the actual engineering madness that makes this 1,000-mile sprint even physically possible, because you can't just slap a bigger gas tank onto an old airframe and expect it to break records. To get a fighter jet to fly twice as far while maintaining blazing Mach 2 speeds, American engineers had to completely reinvent jet engine technology from scratch. Enter the Next Generation Adaptive Propulsion Program, or NGAP. Right now, General Electric and Pratt & Whitney are locked in a high-stakes, multi-billion-dollar race-building rival prototypes, specifically the XA-102 and XA-103. If you open up a standard aviation textbook, it'll tell you that traditional fighter jets use low-bypass turbofans. These are great for raw, face-melting speed, but they burn through fuel like a rocket ship. On the flip side, commercial airliners use high-bypass turbofans, which are insanely fuel-efficient, but move with the urgency of a wet noodle. The genius of the F-47's new engine is that it refuses to choose between the two. Instead, it introduces a revolutionary three-stream architecture that allows the engine to dynamically change its shape mid-flight. Think of it like an ultra-smart automatic transmission for the sky. When the F-47 is cruising over the massive empty stretches of the Pacific Ocean, the engine automatically opens up a third bypass stream, instantly transforming itself into a super-efficient commercial airliner-style engine. This mode slashes fuel consumption by an unbelievable 30%, which is exactly how the jet stretches its operational radius past that legendary 1,000 nautical mile record. But the second a pilot encounters an enemy or needs to intercept a target, the engine instantly reconfigures itself, closing that third stream to channel every single ounce of compressed air straight into the core. Boom! Instantly have a high-performance turbojet pumping out raw, unrestricted supersonic power. But the engineering rabbit hole goes way deeper than just fuel savings. In sixth-generation warfare, the biggest enemy isn't always radar, it's thermodynamics. All the insane computers, state-of-the-art radar arrays, and electronic warfare suites crammed inside the F-47 generate a mind-boggling amount of heat. On an older stealth jet like the F-22, managing that thermal energy is an absolute nightmare. If the jet gets too hot, it creates a massive infrared heat signature that glows like a beacon for enemy heat-seeking missiles and advanced tracking sensors. The NGAP three-stream engine solves this by using that extra stream of air as a massive built-in air conditioner. It literally doubles the cooling capacity compared to any previous fighter engine in history, routing cold air through the airframe to absorb the heat from the electronics before it can ever escape. It effectively builds a thermal cloaking device around the jet, keeping its infrared profile completely buried. Now, pulling this off isn't easy, and the project has hit some serious friction. Pentagon budget documents show that supply chain bottlenecks have actually pushed final engine selection toward 2030. But the Air Force is so desperate for this game-changing propulsion that they're pumping serious cash into it, including a massive $5 billion development surge in the 2027 budget request alone. They know that whoever masters adaptive cycle propulsion controls the high-altitude, high ground. It's an engineering flex that doesn't just improve performance, it completely redefines how a jet interacts with physics, leaving traditional fixed-cycle foreign engines looking like technology from the Stone Age. But in the modern sky, a lone fighter is an obsolete concept, the autonomous orchestra. If you're just looking at the F-47 as a standalone airplane, you are completely missing the actual magic trick of sixth-generation warfare. The Air Force isn't just buying a fancy $300 million stealth jet to let a lone pilot go full Top Gun against a swarm of enemies. No, the Phoenix is designed to be the ultimate airborne quarterback. It's the centerpiece of a highly synchronized, lethal team. This is where the concept of collaborative combat aircraft, or CCAs, comes into play. Think of them as hyper-advanced, AI-powered drone wingmen that fly side by side with the crewed fighter. The Pentagon is currently tracking a plan to buy at least 1,000 of these uncrewed systems, assigning at least 2 to every single F-47 and F-35 in the fleet to completely overwhelm adversary defense networks through sheer digital coordination. To understand how this looks in practice, picture a single F-47 cruising deep inside a contested zone, completely dark on radar. Flying miles ahead of it, piercing deep into the danger zone, are autonomous platforms like Anduril's YFQ-44A Fury or General Atomics' Dark Merlin concept. These aren't your basic, slow-moving surveillance drones from the early 2000s. These are high-performance, stealthy, algorithmic combat systems. While the human pilot sits safely back in the shadows, managing the battlefield from a secure distance, the drone wingmen are doing all the dirty work. They act as a forward-deployed sensor mesh, flying right into the teeth of enemy air defenses to map out radar nodes, jam communication frequencies, and even bait surface-to-air missile batteries into turning on their systems and revealing their locations. This creates a massive tactical dilemma for commanders in Beijing or Moscow. If a drone swarm pops up on their screens, do they fire their incredibly expensive, limited supply of hypersonic interceptors to shoot down a relatively cheap, uncrewed AI platform? If they do, they just wasted their best ammunition on a drone and revealed their position to the F-47 lurking nearby. If they don't, those CCAs will fly right past their perimeters and drop precision ordnance directly onto their command hubs. It completely flips the financial and tactical math of modern warfare. The F-47 coordinates this entire autonomous orchestra via secure, jam-resistant data links, turning a single crewed mission into a distributed network of ghost targets that can strike from multiple angles simultaneously. What makes this even crazier from an engineering standpoint is that these AI wingmen are modular. If the mission requires extra firepower, the drones can be packed with extra air-to-air missiles to act as a flying magazine for the F-47. If the mission is purely electronic warfare, they carry advanced jamming pods. The human pilot doesn't have to micromanage them either. The onboard AI algorithms handle the flight physics, formation flying, and basic tactical maneuvering, allowing the pilot to focus purely on high-level strategic decisions. It's a level of asymmetric warfare that turns traditional aerial combat completely on its head, leaving older, legacy air forces completely outmatched by a digital hive mind they can neither track nor stop. This leaves us standing at the edge of an entirely new geopolitical chessboard, the digital twin. How did the F-47 leap from a secretive Pentagon wish list straight into an active production line? We look at a fresh angle that completely blindsided foreign intelligence: the death of the traditional physical prototype. Historically, developing a brand new fighter jet is a bureaucratic nightmare that drags on for decades. Look at the F-35. It took nearly 20 years of public, painful engineering failures and massive cost overruns before it became fully operational. China and Russia based their entire long-term strategies on the assumption that the US would be trapped in that exact same slow, agonizing development cycle for its sixth-generation fleet. They figured they had until at least the late 2030s to catch up. Instead, the Air Force completely changed the rules of the game by running a covert, highly classified X-plane testing program entirely in the dark. For 5 years, leading up to the 2025 contract announcement, experimental tech demonstrators flew hundreds of hours in top-secret test ranges. But these weren't standard prototypes. meant to show off a finished jet. Their sole purpose was to gather raw aerodynamic, structural, and electromagnetic data to feed into a massive, hyper-detailed virtual simulation. This brings us to the real secret weapon behind the F-47's record-breaking timeline: the concept of a digital twin. Boeing engineers didn't just sketch out blueprints on paper, they constructed a flawless, piece-by-piece digital copy of the F-47 inside an advanced software ecosystem before a single piece of metal was ever cut. They ran millions of simulated flight hours, stress-tested the airframe against extreme Mach II G-forces, and analyzed its radar cross-section against simulated S-400 radar frequencies, all entirely in code. Because the digital twin allowed them to solve engineering flaws in virtual reality, the Pentagon was able to completely skip the slow, public, experimental prototype phase. This is exactly why the platform bypassed the standard X or Y experimental designations and went straight to the official F for fighter when it was unveiled. The tech was already mathematically proven. Right now, as manufacturing ramps up at Boeing's St. Louis facility, engineers are building an aircraft whose physics have already been perfected in cyberspace. It's a rapid, software-driven approach to warfare that has left foreign adversaries completely empty-handed, staring at a sudden, fully realized production timeline they never saw coming. The physical metal is already rolling off the assembly lines, and global military calculus will never be the same. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss the next deep dive.